Welcome to Piss Poor and Shit Rich, a Utah critique. I am your host, Goel, otherwise known as the Alabama Hammer. And tonight we're examining why Utah has become overwhelmingly gay or less strident about sexual assault and overwhelmingly more globalist, overwhelmingly more expensive to live. And so I want to caution everybody here, watching this. I'm going to say some things. I'm going to say some very not nice words in this episode. And if you're a Latter-day Saint, you're just going to have to deal with it. If you're an active Latter-day Saint, you're just going to have to deal with it. Because at this point, I think the truth is more important than couching it in diplomatic or soft language. So the problem in Utah, and the problem in Utah from its founding to the present day, is the fact that it is run by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here's what I mean by that. 9 out of every 10 elected legislators at the state level are Latter-day Saints. And as you're going to see in this episode, the church sends its lobbyist to those legislators, 9 out of 10 being Latter-day Saints who have taken the oath to fulfill the law of consecration. That is, to pledge their time and talents and everything the Lord has blessed them with to build up Zion, which is the church. And as a result, the policies that are coming forth in Utah are not policies that are separate from the church. These are policies that are because of the church. And that should disturb everybody, because a lot of the policies that are coming out of the church through the legislature are not consistent with what the church purports to stand for or what it purports to teach. And we're going to examine that in explicit detail. But before we get into that, I'm going to play you an ad that I came up with, which examines a staggering statistic that was put forth. I became aware of it on Twitter from accounts like Disagree Butter. That's a great name for an X account. And the statistic was that Salt Lake City had 158 plus rapes per 100,000 residents, compared to Los Angeles, which had 40 plus rapes per 100,000 residents. So that means that in the land of Deseret, Salt Lake City, the capital city of this state, has a rape rate per 100,000 residents that is almost 4 times higher than that of Los Angeles. So we're going to get right into that ad right here shortly, so you can see exactly how I feel about it as Goel, the Alabama Hammer, and how I've been approaching this for almost 4 years now, in terms of, I believe sunlight and mockery are the best disinfectants for corruption. So without further ado, here is Salt Rape City.
Welcome to Salt Rape City. Here in Utah, we do things with every bit of gusto we have, and rape is no exception. We're proud to be more prolific at rape than bigger cities like Los Angeles by more than 4 times. They're putting up rookie numbers at 40.3 rapes per 100,000 people, while Salt Rape City is killing it with 158.5 rapes per 100,000 people. Remember, it's not rape if your priesthood holder wants it. And he's exempt from eternal punishment and temporal punishment if he's received his temple recommends and his calling and election have been made sure. That's because Utah has a 2.97% conviction rate for rape. We're working to get that number down, so that the 3 men who have to face criminal consequences for rape will no longer suffer at the hands of their beguiling female or child victims. Salt Rape City, a sanctuary city for rapists. We're sponsored by O'Leary Digital, steamrolling local governments everywhere. Thanks, Stuart Adams and Abigail Marie Ross.
So that was Salt Rape City, our advertisement in response to the revelation that Salt Lake City has a rape rate per 100,000 residents almost 4 times higher than that of Los Angeles, and that's an outcome that we can all be proud of as people who live in Utah. I mean, I live here part-time. I've been standing against this for 4 years now, and the reality of it is I haven't really even budged the needle on this issue. The fact that we have a 2.97% conviction rate in this state for rape is disgraceful, especially since 62% of the residents of this state are purportedly Latter-day Saints, and an overwhelming number beyond that are self-identified Christians. This is not what we want as residents, as citizens of this state, as voters and taxpayers. We do not want a 2.97% conviction rate for rape. We don't want a reality in which 97 out of 100 rapists go free. And that's effectively what we have. And if that were to change, it would change because 9 out of every 10 legislators were feeling pressure from the top, as lobbyists put it, for the church. We're going to see that in a minute, in terms of changing the narrative and the enforcement around rape as a crime in the state. Of course, that isn't one of the church's priorities. The church doesn't get involved in politics until it does. And what I'm here to tell you, and the theme of tonight's episode, is that the church gets involved in politics when it suits the church. It abstains from politics when it doesn't have any bearing on the church. The church really doesn't care about the outcome from a policy standpoint. The reality of it is, if you want to know why things are so fucked up in this state, it's because the church either acts or doesn't act on legislative policy and outcomes. And so, in the Salt Lake Tribune, one of the things that was highlighted recently is the fact that 9 out of 10 legislators in the Utah State Legislature are Latter-day Saints. And you might think that there's separation of church and state in the state of Utah. I am here to tell you that there isn't. And we're going to get into that. Let's talk about what the actual Utah Constitution says. And let's talk about the difference between what the Utah Constitution says and reality. So, Utah Constitution, Article 1, Section 4. The rights of conscience shall never be infringed. The state shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. No religious test shall be required as a qualification for any office of public trust or for any vote in any election, nor shall any person be incompetent as a witness or a juror on account of religious belief or the absence thereof. There shall be no union of church and state, nor shall any church dominate the state or interfere with its functions. No public money or property shall be appropriated for or applied to any religious worship, exercise, or instruction, or for the support of any ecclesiastical establishment. And of course we know that that's bullshit, because the church is a tax-exempt entity. It receives the public services and access to infrastructure that any other tax-paying Utahn receives. It just doesn't pay any taxes itself, even though it has $300 billion in assets. So, let's talk about this section here. There shall be no union of church and state, nor shall any church dominate the state or interfere with its functions. Well, there's a man named Carl Wimmer. And Carl Wimmer apparently was a lobbyist. He was also in the Utah legislature at one point, and this is from his website, a post on it. You can see this at Beggar's Bread. The role of the LDS Church in Utah's politics. Having served in the Utah legislature, I have been asked several times what role the LDS Church really plays when it comes to Utah politics, and until now I have remained largely silent. While in the legislature, I was a faithful member of the LDS Church. To speak of things that might bring embarrassment to the church would have been unwise, not to mention political suicide. Kind of flies in the face of there shall be no union of church and state, nor shall any church dominate the state or interfere with its functions. Today the issue is very topical with the recent passage of pro-LGBT legislation, and I feel it is time to break the silence and provide some insight. To be absolutely fair, they rarely want things badly enough to engage openly. The church is very selective regarding this legislation they engage. This is due to the fact that because most of Utah's legislators are LDS members, the majority of legislation already aligns with the LDS church position without their influence. During the 3 terms I served in the Utah House of Representatives, I was only approached twice by LDS lobbyists for a vote. A common question from people is whether the LDS church leadership gets whatever they want when it comes to Utah politics, and the answer is a resounding, quote, yes, if the LDS church wants something in Utah politics, they get it. John Taylor and Bill Evans are full-time employees of the LDS church, and their job is to monitor the Utah government and to act as paid lobbyists on behalf of the church. They regularly meet with legislators behind closed doors, as do other lobbyists. This is nothing nefarious or unusual. Yes, it is. To push the agenda of their employer, because these lobbyists who are meeting behind closed doors with legislators, oftentimes without the public being aware of what's going on, that's virtually a secret combination. In Mormon speak, that's how power is obtained through nefarious means. We have an Open Records and an Open Meetings Act in this state to combat that explicitly. So when LDS lobbyists contact a legislator, the conversation goes like this, according to Carl Wimmer. We are here to discuss such and such bill. We have received our orders, quote, directly from the top, and we want you to vote for this bill. It is no secret that in the history of this state, the apostles and the first presidency convened to discuss legislative items. That's historically what they've done. And as Carl Wimmer readily admits, yes, if the LDS church wants something in Utah politics, they get it. The inverse is true as well. If they don't want something, they make sure that it doesn't happen. I'm a caregiver at a Utah State Developmental Center, so I'm piss poor. That is GLOJAS. Well, unfortunately, I understand what you're talking about. Utah doesn't exactly prioritize Utah State Developmental Center funding and whatnot. They do prioritize data centers, things of that nature for Canadian developers and billionaires like Kevin O'Leary, but not any services inward towards the poorest and most vulnerable members of the state. Why would you do that? So at the end of the day, things happen or don't happen in the state of Utah from a legislative standpoint precisely because the church supports or does not support such activities. So when we talk about the things that have gone on lately in the state of Utah from a legislative standpoint, we're talking about policy items that are mortared into law. with the support of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or without the express opposition of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, the church likes to have it both ways. They like to say that they're nonpartisan, they don't really get involved in politics, but they very clearly do. And it's very interesting that Carl Wimmer is talking about the pro-LGBTQIA legislation that was passed at the time with the church's support. So let's take a look at that legislation in Utah. Let's talk about the fact that Utah ultimately passed legislation barring discrimination on the basis of employment and housing based on one's sexual orientation, which is kind of odd because they basically created a protected class out of LGBTQIA people. So let's pull that up. Let's pull the legislation that Carl Wimmer is talking about up. And let's pull up a few other examples while we're at it. So let's talk about equal rights and religious exemptions. So in 2015, Utah Senate Bill 296 protected LGBTQ plus individuals from discrimination in housing and employment while simultaneously writing religious exemptions in the state code. So let's say that you're an actual Latter-day Saint who rents property, and you're a faithful Latter-day Saint. You believe in the family proclamation. You believe that sexual orientation isn't a thing, that sexuality and sexual behavior is a choice. And let's say you're fair and even-handed about it. Let's say that you don't allow your heterosexual tenants to have visitors of the opposite sex overnight, because you think that unmarried sex is immoral, and you want to include that in your lease agreement. And of course, your tenant is free to go somewhere else that allows them to engage in such behavior if they are so inclined. They don't have to rent from you. Well, you can't do that under this legislation. You can't do it for straight people. You can't do it for gay people. You're not free to do what you want with your property if you're renting it in the state of Utah. You're not free to impose terms in your lease. You're a private party contracting with another private party. You have to allow them to engage in behavior that you might consider deeply immoral, deeply wrong, contrary to God. And they get to do that in your house. Basically, it's your property. You're leasing it out for someone else to live in, but they can do what they want. They can do what they please. Because under this legislation, sexuality isn't a choice. It's a state of being. It's who you are. And your sexual behavior that you engage in is an identity. It's an identity that rises to the level of skin color or ethnicity, things that you can't control, things that you're just born with. That's the level that we've reached in this state. And Utah Senate Bill 296 was passed with the support of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's a fact. So basically, they took a choice in sexual conduct and they elevated that choice to an identity in a protected class. And it's only gotten worse because now the guidance that has been issued to bishops in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that if they have a transgender member, which is an oxymoronic concept in reality, you can't be a Latter-day Saint or a Christian and be transgender. You can't be a Latter-day Saint and gay. You can't be a Christian and be gay. You can't be a Christian and be transgender. Um, it's the fact that you have an attraction to someone does not mean that you have to act on it. It doesn't mean that it's your entire identity. There are lots of us who are quote unquote heterosexual. We're attracted to people of the opposite sex, but if we engage in that attraction and we behave on it, or we choose to act on it outside of the context of marriage, we can't be Latter-day Saints. We can't be Christians in most Orthodox Christian denominations, and rightfully so. But if you try to carry that to your property that you own, and you try to say, I'm not going to have this particular behavior on the part of my tenants on property that I own, well, then you're infringing on their civil liberties. You're infringing you're infringing on who they are. You're trying to regulate their private behavior on your property. That's the reality here. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is fine with it. It's fine with it in its meeting houses now, because the guidance that was recently issued in the last year to bishops and stake presidents was that if a male to female transgender wants to use the restroom that corresponds to their preferred gender, or more accurately, their mental delusions, their mental illness, the bishop can't say anything to them about it. And as long as they are escorted to the women's restroom, and a monitor stands outside of the restroom while they use it, they can defecate in that women's restroom as a man, and biological female Latter-day Saints have to wait outside the door to relieve themselves. That happened with the church's full sanction. In fact, that was guidance issued from church headquarters in Salt Lake to every LDS meeting house, every LDS stake center, every LDS ecclesiastical authority. That is church policy. It's the same thing at BYU. The church, through BYU's officials, issued guidance stating that people who were in open same-sex relationships would no longer be disciplined for being in open same-sex relationships. And they promptly said, oh, we didn't really change the policy. Well, yes, you did. The policy was that you're normalizing same-sex relationships, even though that conflicts with the family proclamation, and that conflicts with what has been essential core doctrine of the church from its inception. And you did change the guidance by making that distinction and saying, oh, same-sex couples will no longer be subject to discipline for being openly in same-sex relationships on BYU's campus. So, let's talk about that extending to not just the church's properties, such as its meeting houses and its stake centers and its membership. It's been extended statewide, because the church supported Senate Bill 296. And Senate Bill 96 was passed into law with church support. It enabled LGBTQIA individuals to sue any landlord who had a problem with them engaging in LGBTQIA behavior on property that they leased. It put the church and its position in a position of overriding the position of private landlords, who are faithful Latter-day Saints who believe in the church's doctrines on same-sex and opposite-sex behavior. A good many of those people probably would have had a problem with heterosexuals engaging in extramarital or premarital sexual intercourse. So at the end of the day, that's the church's position. And of course, those private individuals are not the church. They're private individuals who want to rent out their privately owned property to individuals on their terms. And it's not like they're discriminating on the basis of an immutable characteristic such as skin color or ethnicity. But the church played into the role of secular humanism, or they played into the position of secular humanism by normalizing same-sex conduct. Because at the end of the day, sexuality at some point is a choice. It's a choice as to whether or not you act on it. And it's a choice whether you're straight, whether you're gay, whether you're bisexual, or whether you're any number of the other acronyms. It's a choice to behave that way. It's a choice to act on your attractions. And it's not an uncontrollable choice. There's plenty of us in the heterosexual community know that because we exercise discernment. We're attracted to people of the opposite sex, but we make a discriminating choice as to which members of the opposite sex we're going to have sex with. And homosexuals, same way. So it's not this overriding, overpowering urge. And the danger here is that now that you can't discriminate in the state of Utah on the basis of quote-unquote sexual orientation, which has no empirical basis or validity whatsoever as a concept. It's a social construct from social scientists. It has no scientific basis whatsoever. It's just a concept that they came up to dress up this attraction and make it seem like it was an immutable characteristic, like skin color or ethnicity. It was something you just can't help, and therefore you shouldn't be subject to discrimination based on that characteristic. Like, at the end of the day, that's what this is. It's window dressing. And the church aided and abetted the normalization of homosexuality. That's the reality. And they did so at the legislative level because if the church wanted to oppose this, Utah Senate Bill 296 would have been dead in the water. If the church wanted to oppose homosexual conduct or transgenderism in its membership, they wouldn't have issued the guidance permitting transgender men, men who errantly believe that they're female because they're mentally ill. The church wouldn't have issued guidance to bishops, prohibiting bishops from saying anything about a man in women's clothing. They wouldn't have issued guidance prohibiting anyone from forbidding that man from using the women's restroom. But they did. And those of us who oppose it on moral grounds, who cite Leviticus 18 and 20 as the basis for it, who accurately connect such conduct, whether it's incest or homosexuality or bestiality or transvestitism, to scriptural passages which rightly identify such conduct with satanic idolatry. We're held up as bigots, homophobes. We're afraid of homophobes. We're afraid of transgender people, and the truth is, we're not. None of us have any fear of these individuals. I don't have any fear of these individuals. If I did, I certainly wouldn't be doing this episode tonight. My opposition to such conduct, or the normalization of such conduct, is born out of the fact that I have had gay friends. And the lifestyle doesn't work. Been to 6 funerals for gay friends, directly related to their sexuality. As I've said in previous content that I posted, every single one of them was sexually abused. Every single one of them was physically abused in their childhoods. Every single one of them had mental health diagnoses. Every single one of them had issues with their mental health, with substance abuse, so on and so forth. And that was in the context of having friends and family who were affirming. I pointedly told a number of my gay friends in my younger years, it's okay to be gay. There's nothing wrong with it. And clearly, the data doesn't back that up. Clearly, what we're seeing play out in a time of unprecedented support and tolerance for homosexuality and transgenderism and whatever LMNOP designation has followed, it hasn't resulted in improvement for these individuals. Gay men make up at most 5% of the population. They constitute 53% of all new diagnoses of HIV annually and over 80% of all new syphilis diagnoses annually. And to be fair, heterosexuals who are engaged in promiscuous sex account for a disproportionate amount of STI and STD diagnoses annually anyway, because, again, sexual immorality doesn't work. People who are sexually promiscuous report higher degrees of mental health or higher levels of mental health diagnosis and higher incidence rates of self-harm, suicidal ideation, substance abuse, so on and so forth. Because here's the thing about sin, it doesn't make you happy. And for legislatures and for churches to be normalizing this behavior, which is self-destructive. I mean, what the Bible says about sin is the wages of sin are death. This is what it leads to. And as someone who has attended 6 funerals for his gay friends and many more for other friends who are addicted to drugs and substance abuse, are plagued by substance abuse, I would say that that's an accurate characterization of the problem. But of course, that doesn't stop the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from applauding the passage of Utah Senate Bill 296 back in March 2015. This was their statement. It's up on the church's website. We are pleased that the Utah legislature has passed Senate Bill 296. It reflects the very best of collaboration and statesmanship from groups and individuals who may not always agree on all things, but who have passed landmark legislation that balances religious freedom and anti-discrimination. While other states may find a different solution, we hope that this fair, balanced approach shows that fairness for all is possible. The church applauds the efforts of the Utah legislature and other members of the community for this historic accomplishment. Well, the problem is for people who are active Mormons, faithful Mormons, Orthodox Mormons, they could now be sued for refusing to rent to people who are openly gay. They could be sued for refusing to rent to people who engaged in behavior that they considered deeply immoral on their property. And this happened with the church's full support, even though the church doctrinally is opposed to this. The church said that this was about religious liberty and anti-discrimination. Well, we discriminate all the time. We discriminate against certain behaviors, certain choices. We discriminate against murder. We discriminate against robbery. We discriminate against theft. We discriminate against burglary. We discriminate against rape. We discriminate against sexual abuse. There's certain behaviors that we're just opposed to because they don't work and because they're not conducive to an ordered society. And what we've seen time and time again among gay men is that they have this curious predilection. Overwhelmingly gay male couples who have been extended full civil rights and liberties for things like adoption. They don't adopt little girls. They adopt little boys. And time again, every time you open Twitter or you go online, you can find examples of gay couples who have adopted boys who are being arrested increasingly for raping those boys, for abusing those boys. The reality is heterosexuality and homosexuality are not the same thing, and a relationship between two individuals who are covenanted with God in marriage is not the same as a relationship between two people who have a piece of paper that says that they're married from the state. Those are not the same things. And instead of having any moral clarity about it, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints erred on the side of secularism. And as Carl Wimmer said, I was only approached twice by LDS lobbyists for a vote. A common question from people is whether or not the LDS church leadership gets whatever they want when it comes to Utah politics. And the answer is a resounding, quote, yes. If the LDS church wants something in Utah politics, they get it. If they don't want something in Utah politics, it doesn't happen. Which is why recently, when there was legislation before the Utah legislature, in which people who are here legally were going to be denied access to state benefits, the Church of Jesus Christ came down against that legislation. And as a result, that legislation wasn't passed. So you as a taxpayer are being asked to fund public benefits for people who are criminals the minute they set foot on U.S. soil illegally. And what you have is an illegal alien invasion in this country. You have somewhere between 20 and 40 million people who are here illegally. And you're expected to take food off of your family's table to pay higher taxes to support public services for criminals. That's exactly it. And you know what those people regard our laws and our customs as by the fact that they flagrantly disregarded them by entering our country illegally in the first place. If you, as an American citizen, tried to cross the Mexican border illegally and overstay your visa or overstay beyond the legally permitted time, the Mexican government would deport you. Especially if you were acting up with flagrant disregard and disrespect for Mexican customs and laws. That's what would happen in virtually any other developed country, except in the West, where, curiously enough, we have been inundated with immigration, legal and illegal, from people who clearly do not believe in Western values. They don't believe in Western secular values, which are informed by religious values. They don't believe that everyone's created in the image of God. They don't believe that everyone is equal before the law. And their behavior reflects that. That's why Germany and Sweden and France are seeing an explosion in rape rates. Because suddenly you have all of these Muslims who believe that non-Muslims are lesser. You see the same thing with Zionists. You have footage on the internet of Zionists in New York who believe that they should be able to take possession of people's apartments and homes. They're showing up to evict the lawful owners, to take possession. The reality of it is, Semitic people who are Zionist and who are Islamist do not believe that non-Islamic people or non-Zionist people are equal, that they should have the same protections as anyone else. That's the ugly truth. And in the name of political correctness, a globalist church with $300 billion in assets is cutting the knees out from underneath its own members. They're forcing those members through the legislature to subsidize public benefits for people who are here illegally. Now, the church doesn't want to put its $300 billion in resources towards that end. They want to put your money towards that end, whether or not you agree with it. They want you to pay. And since in the state of Utah nothing happens with or without the church's consent, from a legislative standpoint, in a legislature where 9 out of 10 members are Latter-day Saints, you're going to have to pay. That's why your property taxes are going up. That's why your property taxes are going up by double digits every year. So let's talk about the nitty-gritty of this. Let's talk about how many unlicensed drivers cause a problem in Utah. Because unlicensed drivers, they're the ones causing your insurance in Utah to go up. That's why your insurance is skyrocketing relative to the rest of the country. It's the same in every other state where there's a permissive attitude towards illegal immigration. So, there's a recent article in the Deseret News last year. A third of West Valley crashes involve unlicensed drivers. Now, what they don't want to say is unlicensed drivers are often here illegally, an overwhelming majority. So, in 2023, nearly 50% of the 2,000 serious car crashes in West Valley City involved an unlicensed driver, up from a 4-year average of 30%. From January to August 2024, nearly 50% of the 120 hit-and-run cases that were solved in West Valley City also involved an unlicensed driver. So who do you think is holding up legislation that would target unlicensed driver? Who do you think's doing that? Like, who do you think is causing that? If you were to talk to anybody in this state, if you were to extrapolate these numbers, they're pretty consistent across all jurisdictions in Utah. So unlicensed drivers are 3 times more likely to kill and 15 times more likely to flee because, A, they're here illegally and they don't want to get deported. That's the B. They don't want to get deported. So they're going to flee the scene after they hit you, or they kill your relative. And the reason they're here in the first place is because the church has a permissive attitude towards illegal immigration. Because nothing happens in this state without the church's permission. So you can't have stronger enforcement of laws against illegal immigration without the church's permission. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints oppose legislation from public benefits. So let's pull that up. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints did not formally, they didn't publicly oppose state-level legislation like Utah's HB 88 that bars undocumented immigrants from public benefits. Behind the scenes, they did. So they've talked about their position. It's these ephemeral concepts of love and law and family unity. The truth of the matter is, how many families are being torn apart because an unlicensed driver hit one of their family members? How many families are being impacted by the fact that their family member was injured in a serious accident involving an unlicensed driver, someone who was here illegally? And the church expects you to pay for it. They expect you to pay higher insurance rates for your car insurance, because somebody has to pay. They expect you to pay higher taxes for the public benefits, the welfare benefits that are being extended to people who are here illegally, which kind of flies in the face of what Article 1, Section 4 of the Utah Constitution says. There shall be no union of church and state, nor shall any church dominate the state or interfere with its functions. As a practical matter, we all know that that's bullshit. Even before we consider what former Utah legislator Carl Wimmer said, which is, and I quote again, a common question from people is whether or not the LDS church leadership gets whatever they want when it comes to Utah politics. And the answer is a, quote, yes. If the LDS church wants something in Utah politics, they get it. And if they don't want something in Utah politics, that doesn't happen. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is not acting for your benefit as an average Latter-day Saint. They're charging you 10% for access to eternal ordinances that you believe are going to impact your position in eternity in one of the three levels of heaven: the terrestrial, the telestial, and the celestial. So they're charging you that 10%, plus you pay another tax in your income tax, plus your property taxes go up year over year. And you're being squeezed from all levels, in all directions, basically to fund and subsidize the church's political involvement and domination in the Utah legislature. That's why your state budget has gone through the roof. It's a piss poor and shit rich way of governing. So, glow jazz. That is why I don't pay tithing. Well, that's why you're going to be a dickless ministering angel in one of the two lower levels of heaven, if what the church teaches is true. You're going to serve all these gods who have temple recommends, many of whom falsely answer the questions in their annual interview with their bishops. They lie about what they're doing, and they get away with it depending on how prominent they are in the church. And but you don't. Most of us will never see a second anointing. Our calling and election will not be made sure in this life. And let's face it, the reason is because we don't pay taxes to the church to get that. We don't contribute enough money, and we aren't prominent enough to obtain that ordinance. The LDS Church is a pay-as-you-go or a pay-for-play organization. It's all it's ever been. and it is using the Utah legislature to financially press people. Well, I'm also divorced, single mom, so yeah, I'll be a ministering angel. Well, to be fair, given the life that I led before I came to Christ, I'd be happy with a mop bucket job, being a janitor in heaven. I think God is infinitely merciful, which is why someone like me can squeeze through, given the life that I led before I came to Christ. Um, and I don't believe that you need to pay tithing to an institution to qualify for enhanced salvation. But that's another matter for another podcast. Well, the point of this podcast is that in Utah, the church gets what it wants, and nothing happens without the church's approval. So, as you can see on your screen now, we have the current church president, Dallin Oaks. And then we also have the tweet of the week, which I'm about to pull up. So what I want to do is pull Dallin down for a bit. And I want to highlight this tweet, which I found to be quite informative and illustrative of what's going on in the church currently. So here's from the church handbook, the first little tweet that you're going to see up here. Church leaders and members should fulfill all legal obligations to report abuse to civil authorities. This includes mandated reporter requirements when applicable. The church's policy is to obey the law. Bishops and stake presidents use the helpline for specifics on local laws. Leaders should urge offenders to self-report to authorities where required. Why don't you just report people who admit to abusing children as opposed to telling them, oh, it's just on you? Maybe you'll stop their children from being raped. And of course, here's the chosen one of my favorite tweets ever. Imagine being a pedophile, going to a local school and seeing a sign that clearly states they're legally not allowed there, and yet knowing that if they go to church, they can see the same children, and clergy will keep their secret. That's a damn good point. That's a really fucking good point, and it illustrates the piss-poor and shit-rich logic of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Illustrates the thesis within this episode, which is that nothing happens within the state of Utah without the church's tacit authorization from a legislative standpoint. Nothing. Nothing happens without the church's approval. And what Carl Wimmer acknowledged on his website, a common question from people is whether or not the LDS church leadership gets whatever they want when it comes to Utah politics. And the answer is a resounding yes. If the LDS church wants something in Utah politics, they get it. That's the reality. That's what happens here. So when you look at things like the Stratos data center, when you look at things like this data center down in Delta, when you look at everything that is going on in this state, from your property taxes on down, understand something. If the church didn't want that to happen, it wouldn't be happening. The fact that it is happening tells you everything you need to know about the church's position on it. The church could be an instrument to the benefit of ordinary Latter-day Saints and ordinary Utahns. They could be benefiting your bottom line, but instead they're taking money out of your pocket, food off of your family's table, to support positions that are illegal, because it is illegal for someone to come over the border illegally, to be in this country past the term on their visa. But under the laws of the state of Utah, that person can apply for and receive publicly funded benefits. And the reason that wasn't forbidden is because the church behind the scenes lobbied against the legislation that would have disqualified illegal immigrants. And they're not illegal immigrants, they're criminals. They're criminal migrants. Ultimately, the reason that hasn't happened is because the church opposed legislation that would have rendered criminal migrants from being eligible for publicly funded benefits. Because the church has this sort of ephemeral concept of the law and family unity and all of this other nonsense. In the meantime, what is happening in the state of Utah is that you're not just being asked to pay for it for you're not just being asked to pay for the welfare benefits and everything. It's having an effect on your housing costs, which have skyrocketed. It's having an effect on your car insurance, your health insurance, because all of the undercompensation that occurs on Medicaid for illegals is externalized to privately insured individuals in the state of Utah. And that's the reason you have insurance that you can't afford to use. That's the reason your out-of-pocket maximum is $9,000 plus per individual. It's the reason your deductible is between $2,500 and $3,000. It's the reason you're going to go bankrupt even if you're insured, if you have a major medical event. Because you're not just paying for your insurance. You're not just paying for other privately insured individuals. You're paying for people who come here illegally and who use all of the services that you use. They just don't pay for it ever. And the reason they're able to do that is because the church stands against the enforcement of the law as it pertains to people who are here illegally. And the church has the same attitude towards anyone who might enforce the law as it pertains to sexual assault. Let me tell you something. If sexual abuse were a priority of the church, and they really wanted to do something about it, they really wanted to up enforcement, the lack of enforcement would change tomorrow if the church got behind sexual abuse reform. If they got behind greater enforcement against rape, we wouldn't have a 2.97% conviction rate for rape in the state of Utah. We wouldn't have an under 13% prosecution rate for rape in the state of Utah. And Salt Lake City wouldn't have almost 4 times the rate for rape as Los Angeles. The reason we're piss poor and shit rich in the state of Utah is because the church obstructs basic law and order. And they do that because a substantial number of their members have found the church to be a sanctuary for sexual predators. Because the church believes that through the priesthood, they can ultimately cure pedophiles. There's not a dime's worth of proof for that. But that's what the church does. They send you to LDS social services. They don't report you, and you continue to rape and molest and abuse and torture your children. And the church is getting sued for it, but what does the church give a shit? Their insurance companies are the ones that are going to pay any settlements. Their insurance companies, and of course, their members, who are going to shell over that 10% to get access to a temple recommends. Church isn't going to pay a dime for the rape that it enables. And the reason we have a priest penitent privilege in the western United States. The reason that priest penitent privilege hasn't been lifted, which keeps those confessions confidential and keeps bishops and stake presidents and other ecclesiastical authorities from reporting confessions of abuse to law enforcement, is because the church opposes any attempt to lift the priest penitent privilege or to repeal it in states like Utah and Arizona, California, and Oregon and Washington. That's the reason, is because the church opposes it. At the end of the day, there is no good reason to keep a confession of sexual abuse confidential. You can say that, oh, the pedophile won't come to us for absolution. He won't confess to us. Well, so what? The fact that he confesses to you because he believes he can get it off of his chest, he can unburden himself with impunity, and you won't tell the authorities and there won't be any serious consequences for him, but he can get it off his chest. He can relieve his conscience. And he can obtain absolution from you. Because you'll send him to LDS social services. You might disfellowship him. You might excommunicate him. But in my experience, after 4 years of looking into the Hamlin case and other related matters, within a year and a half, 2 years, you will rebaptize him. And he will continue to abuse, because pedophiles don't rehabilitate. Rapists and sexual predators, they don't recover. They don't rehabilitate. They don't change. They're pieces of shit, and they should die. They should be executed. It's that simple. That is the public interest and the public safety. There is one cure for pedophilia. There's one cure for child rapists and serial sexual predators, and that is death. And so as we look at that tweet again, by 1 in a million, let's take a look at that tweet. Let's drop the logo a little bit. Up at the top, you see the church's official policy from the handbook. And down at the bottom, you see the reality. Imagine being a pedophile and going to a local school and seeing a sign that clearly states that you're legally not allowed there, yet knowing that if they go to a church, they can see the same children that they'd see at that school. The clergy will keep their secret. That's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's how piss poor and shit rich it is. And that would change overnight if the church's priority were to change it, because the things that happen in this state happen because the church either supports or opposes a particular policy or agenda. Nothing happens in this state without the church's approval, and everybody knows it. Everybody knows it. If the church says no, it doesn't happen. If the church says yes, it does happen. And so the issue here is this priest penitent privilege, which serial sexual abusers and predators use to hide their abuse and to avoid culpability by confessing to their bishop. That happens with the church's approval. There's no good reason for that to happen. So that pedophile, he can't go to a local school because he's barred legally from going, especially if he has a prior record. But he can go to a church, he can go to a meeting house, and he can see the same kids that he'd see at that school. He can abuse the same kids or have access to the same kids that he's barred legally from having access to because he can't be at a school or within 1,000 feet of a school. He can do that. He can go to your meeting house or your stake center. He can see your children. And the church is going to keep his secret. No matter how many times he's confessed to abuse, they're not going to keep him away from your kids. And you can infer your own reason as to why the church would do that. You can draw your own conclusions. Because the reality of it is, I think it's pretty obvious why the church would do that. And the chosen one on Twitter is absolutely correct to have that insight. It's a brilliant insight. Why should your children have greater protection at school than they do in your ward meeting house or your stake center? Why should they have greater protection from pedophiles and serial sexual predators there than they do at their school or at their church? I mean, you pay 10% of your money to a church that places greater priority and greater emphasis on confidentiality for pedophiles who confess their pedophilia and their child rape than they do children. And we see what that's led to. We see what happened with Wade Christofferson, the brother of First Presidency member D. Todd Christofferson, who incredibly claims that he didn't know about the sexual abuse allegations that his brother confessed to until 2020. He didn't know that his brother, 26 years before, had confessed to sexually abusing children. He didn't know that his brother had been excommunicated and then rebaptized. And then, of course, put in a position where he had access to more children who he then abused again. Because the church places greater emphasis on the restoration of child rapists to full membership and full privileges than it does on the safety of children. The choice is very clear for most people on this matter. Of course you pick the child. You don't pick the child rapist. You pick the child. But of course, with the church, one of the reasons that things are so fucked up and so piss poor and so shit rich in this state is because the church opposes any real effort at holding serial child predators accountable. That is why virtually every time you open the news up on your phone or your computer, you will see another headline which involves a serial child predator who was caught after years of being shielded by church authorities. You'll see that with Christopher Michael Jensen in West Virginia. You can look that case up. He abused upwards of 24 children before the church finally acknowledged what he was. And the church put him in a position of being in people's homes and having access to children, even though they knew from the time he was 13 on he was a sexual predator. Because that's when he was first convicted for sexually assaulting 2 of his female classmates. That's the reality. His father, Blaine Parley Jensen, was over facilities for the church. Or his grandfather was. And if you read the documents from that court case, which I have, it's an absolute horror show. The church knew what Christopher Michael Jensen was, and they put him in a position of having access to children. They shielded him from culpability for what he did from 13 on. And he's not isolated. If you look at the Bussey case, that is Peyton Bussey, in Washington State, he currently has 3 criminal cases against him. 1 in Utah, 1 in Washington State, and 1 at the federal level in a district court in Washington. And he was convicted as like a teenage boy. I think he was 13 when he was convicted of sexually abusing 2 boys. I think they were 5 and 6 years of age. And who was one of the people who was counseling him during this time? None other than Apostle Patrick Kieran, the Quorum of the 12. That's one of the people from the court record who was helping to guide Peyton Bussey along in his rehabilitation. Of course, we know that rehabilitation didn't take because Peyton Bussey was abusing his own nephew sexually over years. And what did his parents do, Phil and Kathy Bussey? They shielded him from culpability, first off. They used every resource at their disposal to shield their son from facing true culpability for what he did. And when their own son and daughter-in-law confronted them and reported Peyton Bussey for sexually abusing their child, they called in a loan for $100,000 that they had made to their children. They retaliated against them because they were being sued for what they did. They knew that their son was a serial sexual predator. They knew that he was abusing their grandson. And their instinct was to retaliate against their children for reporting the abuse to law enforcement by calling in a personal loan that they had made to them. So that's what this is. That's the caliber of individual in church leadership. Because Phil Bussey was a mission president in Madrid, Spain. That's who the church puts in a position of being an ecclesiastical leader. Someone who covers up child rape. Because his son is the perpetrator. That is why this state is piss poor and shit rich, and nothing will change until average Latter-day Saints get up off of their ass and start realizing they need to vote their dollars. Stop giving a church money to cover up child rape. That's what they're using it for. That and their own personal enrichment. They've got $300 billion. They don't need your money. And for the secular authorities who are so hands-off when it comes to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Utah and elsewhere, you need to look at the church as what it is and what it has always been, an organized criminal enterprise. Because the church's historical revisionism is stunning when it comes to sexual abuse. That's why you have apologists like Jacob Hansen saying, oh, it was normal for 13, 14, 15-year-old girls to be married in the 19th century, so that makes it okay. The average age of marriage was somewhere between 18 and 21 over that time. And if you had a church splitting off 13 and 14-year-old girls from their parents in Europe, importing them to the United States in the present day, we call that sex trafficking. But that's what they were doing back in the 19th century, and they did it with impunity. And that legacy has not gone away. At the time that he was assassinated in the Carthage jail, Joseph Smith had multiple warrants out for his arrest. I mean, he fled a death sentence for prior illegality that he committed. That's how he wound up in Nauvoo. And a lot of Latter-day Saints want to engage in revisionism and say that the Nauvoo Expositor was rightly destroyed after its inaugural issue exposing Smith's alleged involvement in illegal acts, including polygamy. The reality of it is they say that because they say, oh, well, the First Amendment hadn't been incorporated to states yet. Well, the Illinois State Constitution at the time had a clause in it that guaranteed freedom of speech. It also guaranteed due process to people. And a city council meeting in Nauvoo is not due process. That's in a court proceeding. And yet, that was the venue that Joseph Smith went to authorize the militia to destroy private property. He was rightly arrested and incarcerated in the Carthage jail. What he did was illegal. It was violative of civil rights. Civil rights of those who owned the Nauvoo Expositor and who arguably were telling the truth about what was going on behind the scenes in Nauvoo. That's why that printing press was destroyed. And you need to realize that nothing has changed for Mormons in the time between the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor and the present day. They still believe that they are a law unto themselves in the church leadership. It is up to you as an average Latter-day Saint to decide whether or not that's going to continue to be the case. It's up to you as an average Utahn to decide whether or not you want to be piss poor and shit rich over policies that the church is tacitly and explicitly approving that are coming at the expense of your bottom line. You're being forced to subsidize the lives from food and housing on down of people who are here illegally because the church believes that illegal immigration shouldn't be illegal. You're being limited in what you can do in terms of deciding or determining what's going to happen on your property when you lease to a tenant, because the church has forbidden you from discriminating against people who are engaging in conduct that you might consider immoral or unwelcome on your property. That's what's happened with the LGBTQIA anti-discrimination bill. If you don't like it, tough shit. Your church went against its own doctrine to enable that. They put themselves in between you and your tenant, and they limited what you could do in terms of determining what happened on your property. And make no mistake about it, this isn't about discriminating against people based on their immutable characteristics, things that they can't help, such as skin color or ethnicity, so on and so forth. At the end of the day, what's going on in this state, the chaos that is unfolding, that is eating into your bottom line with an exploding housing cost, exploding insurance cost, both health and car insurance, is directly a result of the church. And the church could be a force for good. It just isn't. Because nothing happens in the state without the church's consent. And inversely, everything that is happening in the state is happening with the church's consent, either tacitly or explicitly. Because make no mistake about it, if the church didn't want it to happen, it wouldn't happen. Your property taxes would not be going through the roof if the church didn't want them to go through the roof. If the church wanted to oppose what's going on with the Stratos data center down in Box Elder, if they wanted to oppose the spiraling cost in a legislature with where 9 out of 10 elected officials are Latter-day Saints, it would stop tomorrow if the church wanted to get behind it. The church doesn't. The church interferes in politics all it wants when it comes to these other policies such as illegal immigration or LGBTQIA or anything else. But when it comes to things that would actually benefit ordinary people, the church is politically neutral. And of course there is no neutrality in politics. There is no neutrality in morality. You can't be Switzerland. You're either on the good side or the bad side. So what I would say is I'm going to open the chat up to feedback or questions. I think I made my point that Utah being piss poor and shit rich is a direct result of the church's influence on any number of fronts. And at the end of the day, the church's insistence that it is politically neutral or that it abstains from, that's not reality. That's bullshit. And it should be called out as bullshit. Because that's what it is. So, do we have any questions from the chat? Do we have any questions overall? Because we're going to get back to the IRA training videos here in the next day or so. Part 3 will probably be up tomorrow or Monday. Any questions? Any comments? Going once. Going twice. Going 3 times. All right. We'll wrap this episode up. And we will see you either tomorrow night or Monday as we get back to the IRA training series. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next